The Cato Street conspiracy, which grew out of disturbed social conditions, amidst general distress, and when the people were beginning to agitate for a larger share of political power, was among the earliest, and to some extent the most desperate plots. Its ringleaders, Arthur Thistlewood and the rest, were committed as state prisoners to the Tower, but they came one and all to Newgate for trial at the Old Bailey, and remained there after conviction till they were hanged. The conspiracy that came to fruition in February 1820 would have been simply ridiculous but for the recklessness of the desperadoes who planned it. That some 30 or more needy men should hope to revolutionize England is a sufficient proof of the absurdity of their attempt. But they proceeded in all seriousness, and would have shrunk from no outrage or atrocity in furtherance of their foolhardy enterprise. The massacre of the whole of the cabinet ministers at one stroke was to be followed by an attack upon the old man and the old woman, as they styled the Mansion House and the Bank of England. At the former the provisional government was to be established, which under Thistlewood as dictator was to rule the nation by first handing over its capital to fire and pillage. This Thistlewood had seen many vicissitudes throughout his strange, adventurous career. The son of a respectable Lincolnshire farmer, he became a militia officer, and married a woman with £10,000, in which, however, she had only a life interest. She died early, and Thistlewood, left to his own resources, followed the profession of arms, first in the British service, and then in that of the French revolutionary government. It was during this period that he was said to have imbibed his revolutionary ideas. Returning to England, he found himself rich in a small landed property, which he presently sold to a man who became bankrupt before he had paid over the purchase money. After this he tried farming, but failed. He married again and came to London, where he soon became notorious as a reckless gambler and a politician, holding the most extreme views. In this way he formed the acquaintance of Watson and others, with whom he was arraigned for treasonable practices, and imprisoned. On his release he sent a challenge to Lord Sidmouth, the Home Secretary, and was again arrested and imprisoned. On his second release, goaded by his fancied wrongs, he began to plot a dark and dreadful revenge, and thus the conspiracy in which he was the prime mover took shape, and came to a head. The government obtained early and full information of the nefarious scheme. One of the conspirators, by name George Edwards, made a voluntary confession to Sir Herbert Taylor one morning at Windsor, after which Thistlewood and his accomplices were closely watched, and measures taken to arrest them when their plans were so far developed that no doubt could remain as to their guilt. The day appointed for the murder and rising actually arrived before the authorities interfered. It was the day on which Lord Harrowby was to entertain his colleagues at dinner in Grosvenor Square. The occasion was considered excellent by the conspirators for disposal of the whole cabinet at one blow, and it was arranged that one of their number should knock at Lord Harrowby's door on the pretence of leaving a parcel, and that when it was opened the whole band should rush in. While a few secured the servants, the rest were to fall upon Lord Harrowby and his guests. Hand grenades were to be thrown into the dining room, and during the noise and confusion the assassination of the ministers was to be completed, the heads of Lord Castlereagh and Lord Sidmouth being carried away in a bag. Lord Harrowby's dinner party was postponed, but the conspirators knew nothing of it, and those who watched his house were further encouraged in their mistake by the arrival of many carriages. Meanwhile the main body remained at their headquarters, a ruined stable in Cato Street, Edgware Road, completing their dispositions for assuming supreme power after the blow had been struck. Here they were surprised by the police, headed by a magistrate, and supported by a strong detachment of Her Majesty's Guards. The police were the first to arrive on the spot, the guards having entered the street at the wrong end. The conspirators were in a loft, approached by a ladder and a trapdoor, access through which could only be obtained one by one. The first constable who entered was run through by Thistlewood with a sword, but others quickly followed, the lights were extinguished, and a desperate conflict ensued. The guards, headed by Lord Frederick Fitzclarence, now reinforced the police, and the conspirators gave way. 9 of the latter were captured, with all the war material, cutlasses, pistols, hand grenades, and ammunition. Thistlewood and 14 more succeeded for the moment in making their escape, but most of them were subsequently taken. Thistlewood was discovered next morning in a house in White Street, Moorfields. He was in bed with his breeches on, in the pockets of which were found a number of cartridges, the black belt he had worn at Cato Street, and a military sash. The trial of the conspirators came on some 6 weeks later, at the Old Bailey. Thistlewood made a long and rambling defence, the chief features of which were abuse of Lord Sidmouth, and the vilification of the informer Edwards. Several of the other prisoners took the same line as regards Edwards, and there seems to have been good reason for supposing that he was a greater villain than any of those arraigned. He had been in a state of abject misery, and when he first joined the reformers, as the Cato Street conspirators called themselves, he had neither a bed to lie upon nor a coat to his back. His sudden access to means unlimited was no doubt due to the profitable role he soon adopted of government informer and spy, and it is pretty certain that for some time he served both sides, on the one inveigling silly enthusiasts to join in the plot, and denouncing them on the other. The employment of Edwards, and the manner in which the conspirators were allowed to commit themselves further and further before the law was set in motion against them, were not altogether creditable to the government. It was asserted that Edwards repeatedly incited the associates he was betraying to commit outrage, to set fire to houses, and throw hand grenades into the carriages of ministers. He was, to use Thistlewood's words, a contriver, instigator, and entrapper. The government were probably not proud of their agent, for Edwards, after the conviction had been assured, went abroad to enjoy, it was said, an ample pension, so long as he did not return to England. 5 of the conspirators, Thistlewood, James Ings, John Thomas Brunt, William Davidson, and Richard Tidd, were sentenced to death, and suffered in the usual way in front of Newgate, with the additional penalty of decapitation, as traitors. A crowd as great as any known collected in the Old Bailey to see the ceremony, about which there were some peculiar features worth recording. The reckless demeanour of all the convicts except Davidson was most marked. Thistlewood and Ings sucked oranges on the scaffold, they with Brunt and Tidd scorned the ordinary's ministrations, but Ings said he hoped God would be more merciful to him than men had been. Ings was especially defiant. He sought to cheer Davidson, who seemed affected, crying out, "Come, old cock of wax, it will soon be over." As the executioner fastened the noose, he nodded to a friend he saw in the crowd, and catching sight of the coffins ranged around the gallows, he smiled at the show with contemptuous indifference. He roared out snatches of a song about death or liberty, and just before he was turned off, yelled out 3 cheers to the populace whom he faced.